Hi, my name's Anna. I was supposed to be boarding a plane for my honeymoon. Instead, I was standing in my bedroom, staring at my phone, while a woman from the marriage office whispered, "Come alone. Don't tell your husband." That one sentence cracked something inside me. The man I just married wasn't who I thought he was. And my family? They didn't warn me. They watched. They stayed quiet. By the time I understood what that silence meant, he was already deciding how much of my life I was allowed to keep. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it right now? Because this story isn't about a wedding gone wrong. It's about what happens when love turns into control and the truth shows up just a little too late. The light in our bedroom had that soft, early glow that only shows up when you're not in a rush. It spilled across the floor and landed halfway on the open suitcase, where a neat stack of folded sundresses waited to be zipped in. My coffee was still warm, balanced on the edge of the windowsill. I'd forgotten it again, too focused on counting how many pairs of shoes I could justify for a 5-day honeymoon. He called from the other room. "Babe, do you want the black swimsuit or the striped one?" I smiled to myself. Striped. It hides more sins. That kind of morning, quiet, slow, easy, felt like a reward, not just a routine. We'd done it the hard way. Years of false starts, of trying to figure out if we were right for each other, of therapy and late-night walks where nothing was solved, but at least we stayed walking. This marriage hadn't happened in a burst of excitement. It was built brick by brick, honest and imperfect. That's why I felt steady, loved, safe. I smoothed out one of his shirts and laid it on top of his side of the suitcase. He'd folded it twice, too bulky, so I refolded it without a word. Small things like that. You don't point them out anymore, you just fix them. That's how you know it's real. The suitcase zipper stuck halfway. I tugged at it once, then again, harder. And that's when the phone rang. It was on the kitchen counter. I wiped my hands on the leg of my jeans and crossed the room. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Local area code, government prefix. Could have been DMV or insurance. Something annoying. I glanced at the clock. 9:43. We were supposed to leave for the airport by 11. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Hello." There was a pause. Not long, maybe a second and a half, but it was enough to feel strange. "Hi, is this Mrs. Caldwell?" "Yes." My voice tightened, not sure why. "I'm calling from the county marriage registration office." My fingers, still resting on the counter, curled slightly. Not because I knew something was wrong, just because her voice wasn't doing what voices like that normally do. There was no cheerful script, no paper shuffling, no congratulations. It was contained, careful. She continued, "I know you're probably busy, and I apologize for calling this morning, but we've just reviewed something that needs to be addressed before you leave town." I swallowed. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." A pause again. "We've rechecked your husband's documents," she said, and I swear it felt like a pane of glass cracked somewhere behind my ribs. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She kept going. "It would be best if you came in to see this in person." Her voice was calm, like she'd practiced this line. But it wasn't customer service calm. It was the kind of quiet people use when they don't want the truth to echo too loudly. I didn't say anything, just waited. "And," she hesitated, "please come alone." My heartbeat didn't spike. It slowed. She added, "Under no circumstances should you tell your husband you're coming." That was the first time I felt afraid. Behind me, I could hear him walking down the hallway, humming something. Probably that awful playlist he'd insisted we use for the flight. I gripped the edge of the counter, not tightly, just enough to feel my feet grounded. "Okay," I said. "I'll send the address. Please come within the hour." She hung up. The silence in the house didn't sound the same after that. The refrigerator hum had a different pitch. The birds outside felt like they were too loud, too careless. I stood still for another minute, staring at nothing. He stepped into the kitchen. "Hey, found the charger. Want me to plug in your phone?" I turned, smiled automatically. "Sure." He kissed the top of my head, oblivious. "We're making good time. You excited?" I nodded. He disappeared back into the hallway, talking about TSA lines and how much he hated airplane coffee. I turned back to the suitcase, unzipped the stubborn corner, and tucked the last shirt inside. My hands moved like I was still living the same life from 5 minutes ago. But something had fractured, not exploded, not even broken loudly. Just shifted. There was nothing in that call that gave me facts, no accusations, no names. But somehow, it had stolen the ground from under my feet. It was the kind of moment you don't panic in, because the panic will come later, and you need to be ready for it. I placed the travel documents back into the front pocket of the suitcase, zipped it up, and checked my phone. No message yet, no address, no proof the call even happened. But it did. I knew it did. I stood there a few seconds longer, pretending I was checking something important. Just buying time. Just breathing. I looked at my phone again, half expecting it to ring back, and realized that the call hadn't given me answers. It had taken away my right to feel safe. I didn't tell my husband. I smiled, zipped the suitcase, and decided to go alone. He was standing by the bedroom window, checking the weather on his phone like he always did before any trip. I watched the way his shoulders moved as he muttered something about rain in Atlanta. There was a time I found that habit endearing, how he needed to feel in control of the uncontrollable, weather, delays, life. I didn't move, just stood there, still holding the zipper in my hand, the weight of that phone call wrapped around me like a wet coat I couldn't take off. I studied his profile, the soft crease near his brow when he read something carefully, the way he tapped the side of the phone when he thought, the little grin he wore when he was just content. And I hated myself, just a little, for not saying anything. But I told myself it wasn't a lie, not yet. It was space, space to understand, space to breathe, space to choose what this was before letting it become something neither of us could take back. Just until I knew more. I cleared my throat. "You want eggs or cereal?" My voice sounded almost normal. That scared me more than the silence. "Cereal," he said without looking up. "We don't want to run late." We moved through the morning like we always did, side by side, in sync. Just enough conversation to fill the spaces without calling attention to them. I poured his cereal, overfilled the bowl. Milk sloshed slightly onto the counter. "Oops," I muttered, wiping it up before he noticed. He set the coffee on the table. "Remind me, what time's our flight again?" 12:20, I replied. Automatic. "And they said to be at the gate by noon, right?" "Mm-hmm. Think we can make it if we leave by 10:30? "Yeah." He smiled. "You're so calm. I'd be sweating bullets if it were up to me to keep us on time." I forced a smile. One of us has to stay sane. I felt each word leave my mouth like a thread unraveling. They didn't feel false, but they didn't feel true either. It was as if I was standing beside myself, watching a woman who looked like me play house while something quietly rotted beneath the floorboards. He went to double-check our boarding passes and charger cords. I sat at the table and stared at my coffee, now lukewarm. The spoon clinked against the rim as I stirred it, over and over just to make noise. I reached for my phone, pretending to check traffic to the airport. No new texts, no confirmation. Nothing from that strange woman. I knew I couldn't just walk out the door and say I'd be back in a bit, not without raising suspicion. So I said the first thing that sounded reasonable. "Hey," I called out. I just remembered, I think I left something at the cleaners. Can I run down there real quick before we leave? He poked his head around the corner. Now? You sure we've got time? It's literally 5 minutes away. I'll be fast. He shrugged. Okay, need me to come? I shook my head, quick but casual. No. You finish packing up the chargers. I'll be right back. He didn't question it. Why would he? This was the way we worked. Divide and conquer. I grabbed my keys and slipped on my shoes like I'd done 1,000 times before. And yet, as I stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind me, something shifted. The latch clicked, and I stood still for a moment, hand still on the doorknob. The morning air hit differently. It wasn't cold, but it bit. Not because of the wind, but because of what I had just done. This was the first decision I'd made in our marriage completely by myself. I got in the car, adjusted the mirror, and just sat. A part of me hoped he'd call out from the window, "Hey, wait up!" or "Want me to grab your wallet?" Something, anything to stop me. But there was only silence. I started the engine. The neighborhood passed by like a memory I hadn't decided whether to keep or let go. Familiar houses, trimmed hedges, a neighbor walking her dog. It should have felt ordinary. It didn't. The streetlights blinked red to green, the radio played some old jazz tune I didn't recognize, and everything looked too normal to be trusted. I turned the volume down. The phone call replayed in my head, piece by piece. Her voice, the careful pauses, the instruction to come alone, not to tell him. That part echoed the loudest, not to tell him. Why? I reached for my coffee, realized I'd left it on the table. My hand hovered for a second, like it still thought the mug might be there. The drive stretched longer than it should have. I caught every red light. Every pedestrian seemed to take their time crossing. Even the breeze through the window was too slow. The county clerk's office sat at the edge of town, in a squat beige building you'd never look at twice. I pulled into the lot and sat with the engine running. This was it. The place you go to change your name. Or ask for a copy of your marriage certificate, not to unravel your life. I turned off the ignition. The sidewalk felt strangely loud under my shoes as I approached the glass doors. A man stepped out, holding hands with a woman in a floral dress. They were smiling, chatting, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I wanted to hate them for it, but couldn't. I pushed the door open. The lobby smelled like paper and hand sanitizer. A printer clicked somewhere in the back. The buzz of fluorescent lights sat just above the hum of quiet conversations. A woman in her 20s was filling out a form. A couple stood in front of a counter, asking about name changes. Everyone here had a reason. Everyone had come to build something. I'd come to unbuild mine. The receptionist looked up as I approached. "Hi, can I help you?" I cleared my throat. "I'm here to see someone. She called earlier, said it was important. Marriage records." She typed something, asked my name, then nodded and motioned toward the seats. "She'll be out shortly." I took the chair closest to the far wall, facing away from the others. My hands folded themselves in my lap, fingers tight. I didn't reach for my phone, didn't open a magazine, just sat. If anyone had asked, I would have looked calm. Inside, though, my mind cataloged every sound. The click of a pen, the rustle of a file folder, a man clearing his throat, the receptionist's laugh when someone said something funny. All of it felt wrong, too loud, too quiet, too normal. I watched the couples come and go, a young man nervously wiping his hands on his jeans, an older woman reminding her partner to sign both copies. Every pair had some version of hope written on their faces, and here I was, feeling both invisible and completely exposed. If they knew why I was here, I thought, they'd look at me differently. My foot tapped. I stilled it. My tongue pressed to the roof of my mouth. I swallowed. Every small movement felt like it belonged to someone else. Then I heard it. "Mrs. Caldwell?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a string pulled tight. I stood up slowly. The woman at the door didn't smile. She wore glasses, her expression unreadable, but kind. Kind in the way nurses are when they know you're not going to like what they're about to say. Her voice was careful, the kind people use when they already know your life is about to change. She didn't ask how my honeymoon was going. She asked me to sit down. I did. The chair across from her felt cold, stiff with formality. She closed the door behind her with a softness that felt rehearsed, as if she'd done this before. And maybe she had. That was somehow worse. She didn't rush. She moved deliberately, adjusting the blinds so we were shielded from the hallway. Her hands laid a thin stack of papers on the desk with care, not clumsy or nervous, just practiced. Each movement was precise, like someone who'd had to give bad news before and learned that gentleness doesn't come from what you say, but how you say it, and when. I sat there, stiff-backed, palms pressed to my knees, waiting for whatever was coming to show its shape. She folded her hands, offered me a glance that wasn't pity, but something softer, maybe respect for how quiet I was. "Mrs. Caldwell," she began, not using my first name, which struck me as intentional. "Thank you for coming in." I gave the smallest nod I could manage. "There's no easy way to say this," she continued, "so I'll stick to the facts. What I'm about to share isn't a legal accusation. It's a procedural discovery." "Okay," I said, though I didn't mean it. My voice was a stranger in the room. She pulled the top sheet from the stack. It was a photocopy, blurry, stamped, dull gray, where ink should have been crisp. "We've been reviewing filings from the last quarter. Some routine verifications." I tuned out the wording. She spoke like she'd been trained not to upset people. No words like love or spouse or relationship left her mouth. Only terms like applicant, status, document conflict. I was no longer a wife. I was a file, an entry, a data point. She kept her voice level. "In the course of that review, a mismatch appeared between your marriage license and other filings connected to your husband's name." My throat tightened. "Mismatch?" She nodded. "There are 2 overlapping records, one prior, one current. It appears there was never a full dissolution of the previous marital declaration." I blinked. "You mean?" She held my gaze. "Based on what we've found, your marriage may not be legally valid." There it was. No noise, no dramatics. Just that. The floor didn't fall out from under me. It just faded, like color draining from a photograph. I could hear my own breathing, louder than I liked. In, out, shallow. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, though it sounded more like a formality than an apology. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My lips parted, but nothing came. Because what do you say when someone tells you that the life you've been living may not be real in the eyes of the law? She reached for another document. Here's where it gets more complex. The record in question, your husband's prior filing, was marked incomplete. There was no final decree entered, no confirmation of dissolution. It left the system in a pending state. "So, he was still married?" I asked. My voice cracked. She didn't answer directly. "The record wasn't resolved. That's the language we have to use." "But he filed paperwork to marry me." "Yes." "And signed everything." "Yes." "So, he knew." My words were slow. Each syllable made my tongue feel heavier. She paused. That pause said everything. "Did he forget?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Her expression didn't change. "That's not something we can determine. We're just notifying you of the filing inconsistency." But I heard it in her tone. He didn't forget. He didn't misunderstand. He avoided. He sidestepped whatever technicality he needed to, just enough to slip through a system built on assumptions and stamps. And I, idiot that I was, I'd signed that license with a smile, thinking I was beginning something solid, permanent. But now, what was I? A placeholder? A backup? Do you think he planned this? I asked before I could stop myself. She didn't flinch, but she didn't answer either, which, in its own way, was an answer. I sat back, shoulders stiff. The room was small, but it felt like I was 100 miles from the door. She leaned forward slightly. I know this is difficult, but I want to emphasize something important. Please don't inform him just yet. That startled me more than the rest. Why? Her voice softened, but there was something steely behind it. Until this is clarified further, and because we don't yet know the intent behind these filings, it's best you proceed cautiously, for your safety. That word, safety. Not your peace of mind, not your dignity, your safety. If strangers are worried about my safety, I thought, then I should be too. She handed me a packet. This outlines what we can do on our end. You'll want to speak to legal counsel. And again, it's critical that you not discuss this with him until you've had time to review everything. I nodded slowly, my fingers curling around the papers without even looking at them. Do you have somewhere to go? She asked gently. I live with him, I replied. Do you have a friend, family nearby? The irony stung. I gave most of that up to build a life with him. Another pause. You're not alone, she said carefully. This happens more often than people think. I wanted to ask, how often? But I didn't. I didn't want to become part of some silent statistic. I didn't want to know how many women sat where I sat, holding papers that told them their marriages weren't real. I stood up slowly. She didn't try to stop me or offer more, just watched me with a sadness that wasn't hers. I gathered my things, hands trembling just enough to make the papers flutter against each other. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't ask why. Instead, a quiet thought moved through, my mind like a whisper I couldn't ignore. The question wasn't whether my marriage was real. It was how long he'd expected me not to notice it wasn't. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car and tried to decide who I could trust. The keys dangled in the ignition, engine off, but I didn't move. My hands were still resting in my lap, the edges of the documents she gave me pressing into my thighs. I stared out the windshield, not really seeing the cars pulling in and out of the lot, just letting my mind walk in circles it couldn't complete. I picked up my phone, not to call him. That wasn't even an option anymore. I opened my contacts, thumb hovering over names that used to feel safe. Mom, Aunt June, my brother. I scrolled slowly as if the answer might glow. Who would believe me without needing proof? Who wouldn't talk me into staying quiet just to keep the peace? Still, I needed someone. I chose the person I'd always been told I could turn to. The one who called herself my anchor more times than I could count. My mother. I tapped her name and brought the phone to my ear. She picked up on the third ring. Hey, sweetie, you at the airport yet? I closed my eyes. No, not yet. Mom, I need to tell you something, but I'm still figuring it out myself. A pause. Is everything okay? I don't think so. My voice was lower than I intended. Something came up with the marriage license. It might not be valid. What do you mean? Her tone sharpened. That doesn't make sense. I was at the clerk's office. They pulled up a record, something about a prior filing. It wasn't closed. Technically, he might still be married to someone else. Another pause, this one longer. Wait. You mean there's another woman? I don't know yet. That's all they would say. Are you sure you're not overthinking this? Her voice softened, which surprised me. Maybe it's just a paperwork mix-up. These things happen. I thought that too. I said quietly. But they told me not to tell him. They said, for my safety. That should have landed like a hammer. But instead, her voice dropped into a tone I knew too well, the one she used when she didn't want things to escalate. Sweetheart, listen. You just got married. Sometimes there are little bumps in the beginning. Maybe it's a clerical error. You don't need to spiral. I'm not spiraling, I said, sharper than I intended. I didn't say you were. I just think maybe don't make this bigger than it is. There it was, 5 words that took all the air out of my chest. Don't make this bigger than it is. I was sitting in a parking lot with government papers in my lap, telling me my marriage might be invalid, and all she could offer was the suggestion that I was blowing things out of proportion. I swallowed hard. So, what? Just go home and pretend nothing happened? No, not pretend, she said gently, as if she were speaking to a child. But maybe take a breath, see what unfolds. Don't accuse him of anything yet. You don't want to ruin things. I stared at the steering wheel. Mom, he might have lied to me, from the beginning. But do you know that for sure? She asked, and the question landed like a slap. People make mistakes. Sometimes they don't mean to. You've always been intense when something feels wrong. Maybe just stay calm. I pulled the phone away for a second and looked at the screen. I wanted to hang up. Instead, I brought it back to my ear and whispered, "Thanks. Call me when you get to the airport, okay?" she added, like this had been just another check-in call. I ended it without responding. I sat there, phone still in my hand, stunned by how much that conversation hurt more than the one with the clerk, because at least the clerk had treated me like someone who deserved to know the truth. My mother had treated me like someone who needed to calm down before I caused a scene. I let my head fall back against the seat. They weren't asking me to be calm, I thought. They were asking me to disappear. The screen lit up again. Another name. My cousin, Laura. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but she'd always had a sharp sense for when something was off. I didn't call her. She called me. I hesitated, then answered. "Hey," her voice came through, a little breathless. "Your mom just called me, told me you were upset about something." I sighed. "Of course she did. What's going on?" So I told her, stripped down, but real. About the call, the visit, the warning. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I didn't dramatize it either. Laura went quiet. Then, "That's serious." "I know. No, I mean, really serious. You need to be careful." I let out a shaky breath. "Thank you." "Start writing everything down," she said, no hesitation. "Names, dates, everything you were told. Don't talk to him yet. Not until you're ready." Finally, someone who didn't treat me like I was breaking something just by noticing it was cracked. "I'm here if you need backup," she added, "and don't delete anything. If he starts asking questions, just say you're tired. Don't show your cards." "I appreciate you." "I know." The call ended, and for the first time in hours, I didn't feel like I was completely adrift. But the feeling didn't last long, because I still had to go home. I sat there in the car a few more minutes, watching the shadows grow longer. The sun was beginning to dip, and I realized I hadn't eaten since morning. My stomach was hollow, but I couldn't bring myself to stop somewhere. I didn't want to be seen by anyone who might ask how the honeymoon was going. Eventually, I started the engine. The drive back was quiet, just the hum of tires and the occasional flicker of brake lights ahead of me. As I pulled into our driveway, I realized how strange the house looked. Same porch light, same curtains in the window, but it didn't feel like home. I sat in the car a moment longer, gripping the steering wheel. I would have to protect myself, I thought, even from the people who raised me. I exhaled hard and opened the door. I walked up the steps, key in hand, bracing for his voice behind the door. and whatever new version of the truth he might be ready to sell me. That night, he handed me a document and said it was just for our protection. He didn't make a production out of it. No dramatic tone, no raised eyebrow. Just walked into the kitchen, set a glass of water in front of me, and placed the folded papers on the table beside it. Just something simple, he said, voice easy. A form, in case we travel or something happens. Just protection, nothing complicated. I looked at the paper. It was stapled neatly, no title visible yet. I didn't reach for it. He sat down across from me like it was just any evening. The lights above hummed gently. The dishwasher was still mid-cycle behind me, and yet everything inside me tightened. "Where'd this come from?" I asked, aiming for casual, but my voice came out smaller than I wanted. He shrugged. "Friend at work mentioned it. Said it's smart these days. You never know with travel, hospitals, insurance. Figured we should be ahead of it." The words tumbled out of him smoothly, like he'd rehearsed them. Maybe he had. I didn't move. "It's nothing official," he added. "Just gives us peace of mind, like a contingency plan." He smiled as he said it. I looked at him then, not the way I used to, not with the lens of someone who thought they knew the man in front of them, but the way you look at a stranger offering you something for free that you didn't ask for. He leaned back, pretending not to watch me too closely. I was exhausted, that kind of deep tired that lives behind your eyes and under your skin. My whole body just wanted stillness, quiet, for things to make sense again. And that's when it becomes dangerous, doesn't it? When you're too tired to question kindness that comes at a cost. He pushed the paper an inch closer. "Just sign at the bottom. It's temporary, really. Can be voided any time." His voice was calm, measured, like I was the one being a little reactive. "Temporary," I repeated. "Exactly. You can read it if you want." He said it like he meant it, but didn't hand me a pen. I unfolded it slowly. Paragraphs, small print, initials needed here and there. Legal language that blurred the more I stared. He didn't explain it. He let the silence do the asking. I read the first few lines. Something about shared responsibility in the case of absence. Power of decision in emergency circumstances. It was vague enough to sound harmless, detailed enough to feel dangerous. I kept my finger on the signature line. "You okay?" he asked, breaking the quiet. "Just tired," I said. Not a lie. "Yeah, today was a lot," he said, his voice warm now. "I just want us to be covered. I hate how unpredictable things can be." That's when I heard it, the turn, the tone that wrapped concern around control. The way people say they love you as they hand you something they want you to agree to, quickly, while you're still off balance. I picked up the pen, my hand hovered. If I signed, maybe we'd go back, to normal. Maybe he'd smile. Maybe we could still go on that trip. Maybe this could all be something I'd laugh about someday, as a weird memory, not a warning. I wanted to believe the paper was nothing. I wanted to believe him. I told myself I'd survived worse. I told myself I could just sign now and undo it later. But then a question floated up from the quietest part of me. If this is harmless, why now? Why not yesterday? Why not after our honeymoon? Why not before the clerk's office, before that voice asked me to sit down? My hand froze, and suddenly I was back there, in that tiny office, fluorescent lights buzzing above me, that woman's soft voice saying, "Please don't inform him yet." I looked at the paper again, and for the first time I didn't think about what signing it would end. I thought about what it would begin. "I think I need some time," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't even look directly at him, just slid the paper back across the table. He paused for half a second longer than someone who wasn't surprised would, then smiled again. "Of course, take all the time you need." But his jaw tightened. Barely. And I knew I'd changed something by not saying yes. We sat in silence. The dishwasher clicked off. A neighbor's dog barked once, then nothing. He stood up and took his glass to the sink. I watched him rinse it like nothing had happened. I sat there a little longer, the document still between us on the table. "I'll read through it again tomorrow," I said, just to keep the air from going thick. "Sure," he replied. Then he kissed the top of my head and walked into the living room. TV flicked on a moment later. Laughter from a sitcom filled the space. I stared at the papers. There had been no fight, no threat, no raised voices. But something in that moment felt more violent than shouting. Because now I understood. This wasn't about protection. This was about keeping me quiet. And that meant, whether or not he admitted it, he knew exactly what I might be starting to suspect. As I placed the unsigned document back on the table, I understood something clearly for the first time. The most dangerous agreements are the ones you're rushed into by someone who says they love you. The next morning, I started looking for answers he never planned for me to find. He was still asleep when I got out of bed. I moved slowly so as not to disturb anything, not him, not the rhythm of the house, not the carefully curated illusion we were both pretending to live inside. The coffee brewed as usual. I fed the dog. From the outside, everything looked unchanged, but something inside me had shifted. I sat at the small desk in the spare bedroom, where I kept the laptop he never touched. It had become my space during our brief marriage, more out of habit than ownership. That morning, it felt like the only corner of the house where I could breathe. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. I just knew I needed to start. I typed in the public records site for the county we were married in. It wasn't the first time I'd been on that site. I'd used it before when we were planning the wedding, checking license timelines, verifying submission steps. I remembered how clean and procedural it all felt then. Easy, like pressing buttons and moving on. Now it felt different. It felt like touching something cold with bare hands. I began with the basics. Our marriage license. There it was, dated, time-stamped, logged. But just beneath that, something else caught my eye. A previous filing under his name from a different year. I clicked. A form from 3 years ago. Also a marriage license. No completion stamp, just pending. I sat back. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashing red, it was a line in a database with a gap in process. But I'd worked enough jobs to know when bureaucracy leaves something open, it isn't benign. It's a thread. And if you pull it, things unravel. I noted the number down. I didn't print. I didn't save the file. I wrote it on the back of an old grocery list and tucked it in my purse. Back on the site, I followed the thread, clicked through linked references, property filings, address changes. I started to see patterns. There was a lease he hadn't told me about, a forwarding address that didn't line up. And then, tucked deep in the system's archives, the document that made everything stop. A dissolution of marriage, not finalized. It was dated just 6 months before he proposed to me. The name of the other woman was there. I recognized the surname. He'd mentioned her once, only once, and said they'd dated briefly. Nothing serious. Nothing serious doesn't require court proceedings. I stared at the screen for a long time. The implications settled in like fog creeping under a door. He stood next to me at the altar while still tethered to someone else. Maybe not in his heart, but on paper. And when you say vows while a legal tie still exists elsewhere, it's not a vow. It's a performance. I read every word, carefully, quietly. He hadn't made a mistake. He'd hidden something. That's the difference I hadn't known to look for before. I logged out, cleared the browser history, and shut the laptop slowly. My hands didn't shake, but my body felt heavier. I wiped the desk with the sleeve of my sweater and pushed the chair back under the table the same way I always did. When I walked back into the kitchen, he was making eggs. He smiled. "Morning, you were up early." I smiled back. "Just couldn't sleep." He kissed my cheek. Later that afternoon, I sat in my car outside the grocery store, pretending to scroll through my shopping list, but my mind wasn't on produce. I'd parked at the edge of the lot where nobody knew me, and I stayed there a while, just breathing, planning. Back home, the house smelled like laundry detergent and dinner prep. He was humming to himself in the living room, like nothing in the world had changed. That's when he asked, "Hey, why are you acting different lately?" The words were soft, tossed over his shoulder like they were nothing. But I heard the weight in them. His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't curious. They were tracking. I paused just a second too long. "Different?" I asked, reaching for the sink faucet like I hadn't heard him clearly the first time. He chuckled. "I don't know, just seems like you're distracted." "Just tired," I said. "It's been a lot lately." He nodded, didn't push, but his gaze lingered a little too long before returning to the screen. I dried my hands slowly, told myself not to rush, not to show my hand, because I understood something now. Knowing the truth wasn't the same as being safe with it. Not yet. I would have to play the long game. So I made dinner. I laughed at a joke. I folded towels. I said goodnight with the same softness he expected. But inside I was already rewiring everything. The story he built around us had cracks, and I just started to see where the light could get in. I smiled and told him I was just tired, but inside I was already planning how to leave without asking permission. That was when he decided to tighten his grip. It began so quietly I almost missed it. He made breakfast that morning, scrambled eggs, toast, nothing out of the ordinary, but the way he hovered behind me as I poured coffee, how he reached past me just a little too slow, like he was making sure I didn't touch my phone or move too quickly. That's what caught my attention. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was reading too much into the way he stood in doorways now, instead of walking through them, or how he asked what time I planned to be back when I left for the store. Before, he never asked. Now, he wanted timestamps. That afternoon, he brought up a trip we'd talked about taking, something casual, vague. "Hey, we should probably start thinking about travel stuff. Yeah?" he said, flipping through some envelopes on the kitchen counter. "You know how hard it is to keep track of documents. I can't even find my insurance card half the time." I nodded, kept folding laundry. He kept going. "We should keep our passports in one place. I'll hold on to both, just until we book something." It wasn't a question. He said it like he was helping, like it was a thoughtful thing to do. I was quiet too long. He smiled too wide. "I mean, unless you want to misplace it. But hey, up to you." I froze just enough for him to notice. That evening, I found him in the bedroom, standing in front of the locked drawer in his nightstand. He turned as I entered, holding a small folder. "I already put them together," he said, like he was announcing something helpful. "Mine was buried under old tax stuff. Yours was easy to find." I didn't remember saying yes. He didn't remember asking. I watched him slide the folder into the drawer, then twist the tiny key. Click. Something shifted in my chest, and it wasn't panic, not yet. It was recognition. He had taken something that belonged to me and treated it like it had always belonged to him. I didn't say anything right away. I sat on the edge of the bed, ran my hands along the comforter, smoothed a wrinkle near the edge. "That's fine," I said eventually. "Thanks." He watched me longer than necessary. Later, after dinner, I tried to gently test the waters. "I might need my passport soon," I said, reaching for my glass. "I might have to send off a copy for a name change form." He didn't even look up. "You always lose things," Let's just keep them safe for now. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice steady. I haven't lost anything. He set his fork down slowly. You always do this. I blinked. Do what? He leaned back. Act like you're so independent. You'd be nothing without me. He said it like he believed it, like it was fact. I don't know what I expected, maybe a laugh after, or some kind of brush off. But he didn't soften it. He let it sit between us like a dish he'd served that I was expected to finish. That night. I stepped outside to take out the trash. I took my phone with me and texted my cousin. A soft attempt. Just, can I call you later? She replied an hour later. Sorry, things are crazy here. Can we catch up next week? I tried my sister next, just asked how she was doing. She answered with a voice note about grocery prices and her toddler refusing to nap. No questions for me. They weren't choosing him. They were choosing not to choose, which, in a way, was worse. I went back inside. The house felt quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just padded, like a room in a dream where sound doesn't carry. I sat alone in the guest bedroom, staring at the lamp. That stupid lamp we'd picked out together at some overpriced boutique. The one he said would pull the room together. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just sat. No passport, no allies, no way out without him noticing. And the worst part was, I knew if I said any of this out loud, it would sound small, like I was overreacting, like maybe I had lost things before. Like maybe keeping both passports together was a reasonable idea. That was the trap. If I stayed quiet, I disappeared. If I fought, I risked everything. But somewhere between those two truths, a third one formed. I didn't have to ask for permission anymore. I stopped waiting for someone to give me the okay to be worried, or angry, or done. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't explain. I would plan. I didn't need anyone to believe me. I needed to get out safely. That night, as I lay awake listening to his breathing, I understood that survival wasn't about being believed. It was about being prepared. I had one chance to leave without setting off alarms, and I knew exactly where to start. I woke before the sun. The air in the house was heavy, still. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting the silence wrap around me like a shield. I didn't rush. I couldn't. Every action had to feel like part of the routine, like I had no idea my life was about to change by the end of the day. While the coffee brewed, I mentally ran through the steps I'd rehearsed in my mind for days now. No notes, no list. It had to live entirely in my head. I couldn't afford a paper trail, not even a digital one. After breakfast, while he was in the shower, I walked into the office, closed the door softly behind me, and pulled out the stack of documents he'd asked me to sign weeks earlier. I hadn't signed them, just skimmed, then set them aside with a neutral, "I'll look at it later." He'd never asked again. Now, I flipped through them slowly, carefully. The pages were written in vague, friendly legalese: mutual understanding, temporary asset control, standard protections. But then, halfway down page 3, I found it. A clause, tucked neatly under a section titled Contingencies. All signatures subject to independent review by either party, upon request. Refusal to allow such review may void the agreement entirely. It didn't look important. That was the point. But it was enough. He'd counted on me being tired, confused, overwhelmed. He hadn't counted on me reading all the way through. I took a photo of the clause with my phone, emailed it to myself using a fresh account with a fake name, then deleted the photo and cleared my browsing history. I shut the folder, put it back exactly where I'd found it, and walked out like nothing had happened. By late morning, I had everything I needed in motion. I emailed a locale attorney using public Wi-Fi outside the library, asked for a same-day appointment, and said nothing specific, just that I needed help reviewing a document and couldn't talk on the phone. He was working from home that day, which meant I had a short window while he stepped out to grab lunch. As soon as the door shut behind him, I grabbed the small tote I'd already packed, just the essentials, a few clothes, a copy of my ID I'd made weeks earlier, the flash drive with the document image, no photos, no keepsakes, nothing sentimental, just what I'd need to function. I walked 2 blocks before calling a rideshare from a side street, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses I never wore. It felt ridiculous and dramatic, until I realized how fast my heart was racing. It wasn't fear of being seen, it was fear of being stopped. When I arrived at the law office, I felt like I was floating. Everything moved too fast and too slow at the same time. The attorney, a woman maybe in her 50s, didn't ask for my life story. She looked at the clause, then she looked at me. "You have leverage," she said flatly. "And you have options. But if you want out clean, you need to act now." Clean. That was all I wanted. We worked through a short, focused plan. What to file, what to say, who to notify. I paid in cash, no trace. She gave me a manila envelope with what I'd need next and wished me luck without asking questions. As I left her office and sat in the back of a second rideshare, my phone buzzed. A text from him. "Where'd you go?" "You didn't say anything." I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, "You okay?" Then, "Call me, now." I turned off the phone. I got out of the car near a grocery store, walked through the building, exited through the other side, and called a third ride from another location. Paranoid? Maybe. But I wasn't taking chances. Back at the house, I entered calmly. He was in the kitchen, arms crossed, trying to look relaxed, but I saw the tightness in his jaw. "Where were you?" "Just out," I said, setting down a bag of things I didn't need. "Needed air." He watched me too closely. "You're acting weird," he said, casual on the surface, but I could hear the strain under it. I shrugged. "I'm just tired." That was the end of it, for now. That night, I packed everything for real, quietly, neatly. I put the manila envelope in the bottom of my purse, next to the backup phone and charger I'd hidden weeks ago. I didn't cry, I didn't second guess. I moved through the evening as if it were any other, washed the dishes, answered 1 or 2 meaningless questions, smiled where I needed to. He went to bed early. I stayed up, claiming I couldn't sleep. And when everything was ready, I stood in the hallway outside our bedroom, just for a moment. I didn't do it to say goodbye. I did it to remind myself why I was leaving. Not because I was angry, because I refused to disappear. I didn't know what would happen next, only that when he realized I was gone, nothing would ever work the same way again. I left the ring where it belonged and walked out without looking back. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but I could feel the day pushing itself up over the horizon as I pulled the car door shut behind me. The sound of it, a soft, final click, rang louder than I expected. I didn't cry, I didn't tremble. I just sat there in the driver's seat for a moment and let the stillness surround me. For the first time in a long time, no one knew where I was. Not him, not my family. Not even the woman at the front desk of the safe housing program I'd called 3 weeks ago, who only had a fake first name and a prepaid number. It was just me, breathing, blinking, moving forward, slowly but forward. I pulled away from the curb like I was driving through water, thick, invisible resistance pressing against every movement. I wasn't rushing to freedom. I was easing into unfamiliar quiet. By mid-morning, I was in a different zip code, sitting on the edge of a bed that didn't belong to me, in a room with beige curtains and a bolted-down dresser. The kind of place people pass through, not stayed in. I'd already wiped down my phone, removed the SIM card, and shut it off entirely. My real name was only on one thing, the envelope the attorney had handed me. now folded carefully in the bottom of my bag. I didn't call anyone. I didn't explain. I wasn't hiding. I was stabilizing. I took a shower, ate a granola bar I didn't taste, sat with my back against the headboard, knees drawn up, arms folded across my chest, like I was holding myself in place. And maybe I was. There was no moment of triumph. No music swelled. No justice came knocking. But I could finally think without being watched. The hours passed in pieces. I filled out forms for legal aid, scheduled a call with the attorney, made a list of things I'd need to replace: identification, accounts, insurance. I kept my movements light and my decisions small. I didn't write about the past. I only documented what came next. I didn't cry when I realized he hadn't tried to reach me. That was part of the plan. No missed calls, no angry messages, no last-minute apologies. And yet, somewhere deep in my chest, there was a dull ache I hadn't expected. Like my heart was still waiting for someone who no longer existed, or maybe never had. The fallout didn't come all at once. It filtered in: an email from a mutual acquaintance asking if I was okay, a family member forwarding a message he'd sent, saying he was concerned about my state of mind. No one asked me directly. They circled around me like I was something radioactive, too dangerous to touch, too complicated to defend. They weren't choosing him. They were choosing not to choose. And I understood that now. Silence wasn't always support for the abuser. Sometimes it was exhaustion, fear, discomfort. Sometimes it was just easier to pretend neutrality was kindness. So I stopped waiting for them to reach out. I stopped trying to write the perfect explanation. I'd done enough just by surviving the exit. A few days later, while folding the small pile of clothes I had in that temporary room, I remembered the ring. I hadn't thought about it much since placing it on the bathroom sink. But now the image came back so clearly, silver against porcelain, the light from the hallway casting a soft shadow behind it. He probably found it by the time I hit the interstate. Maybe he picked it up. Maybe he left it there. Maybe he told someone I lost it in the rush, or threw it down in anger, or never wore it to begin with. But I knew the truth. It wasn't a symbol of failure. It was a line drawn gently but firmly. I kept my promise. I just stopped sacrificing myself to keep it. Healing wasn't immediate. It wasn't even linear. Some days I woke up feeling weightless. Others, I couldn't get out of bed until noon. I jumped at sudden noises. I checked the locks twice before going to sleep. I avoided places I used to love. I didn't trust anyone with kind eyes or warm voices. But I was breathing. I was eating when I was hungry, resting when I was tired, learning how to exist without shrinking myself for someone else's comfort. I didn't rush forgiveness. Not for him, not for my family, not even for myself. It came in layers, in moments, in the way I spoke to myself when I forgot something, or when I looked in the mirror and saw someone tired but intact, someone real. Family was no longer a given. It wasn't a bloodline or a shared last name. It was whoever met me in the middle, without demand, without performance. Maybe that was one person, maybe it was none. But I had peace now, and I protected it like it was a living thing. Distance didn't mean bitterness. It meant boundaries. It meant choosing to stop dancing in rooms that never had space for me to begin with. I stopped explaining, stopped trying to justify what I did, stopped turning myself into a footnote in someone else's comfort story. And one quiet morning, weeks after I left, I stood at the edge of a small park, coffee in hand, hoodie zipped up to my chin, and looked out at a pond with fog still hovering over the water. I wasn't free from pain, but I was free. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed staying silent was the same as keeping peace, the one who mistook endurance for strength, who thought that love meant absorbing damage quietly. She wasn't weak, she was just misled. And now, I carry the wound. Maybe I always will. But I also carry something else, something I earned. I didn't lose a marriage, I reclaimed myself. I don't know if the wound will ever disappear, but I know this. I no longer confuse silence with peace or endurance with love.